Family's supposed to hold you close, but mine only held out their hands for my money. I'm Rachel Miller, 35, and after years of paying their bills, their debts, their dreams, I was told I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner. The group chat lit up with laughter and hearts like erasing me was a holiday gift. That night, I made a choice. Instead of begging for a seat at their table, I booked a first-class flight with my husband and watched their world crack without me. I was standing by the window of my small apartment in Portland, staring at the faint reflection of Christmas lights blinking from across the street when my phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet room. I picked it up, saw Mom's name, and answered before I could think. Her voice was clipped and certain. "Rachel, you are not coming to Christmas dinner this year. Emily wants peace, and you only bring trouble." For a second, the words didn't sink in. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Did you really just say that?" She repeated it slower as if she had practiced. "We all agreed. You are not welcome." Before I could respond, the line went dead. My phone buzzed again. This time it was the family group chat. I opened it, and there it was written in black letters. "We all agreed. You're not welcome." My father reacted with a thumbs up. Michael dropped a laughing emoji, and Emily sent a glittering heart, as if it was a celebration. My chest tightened so hard I thought I couldn't breathe. I dropped onto the couch phone, heavy in my hand. The room felt colder than the December air creeping through the window. For years I had shown up with gifts, cooked food when Mom was tired, covered costs when Dad complained about bills. Every time I told myself that one day they would see me as more than the one who paid and carried and cleaned. But this message made it clear. To them, I was never family. I was only a burden they wanted erased. I stood and walked toward the small artificial tree in the corner. Its lights blinked lazily. Underneath were wrapped boxes. A watch for Dad. A leather wallet for Michael. A new cookbook for Mom. A book of poems for Emily that I had searched for weeks to find. I bent down, touched the sharp corners of the paper, then pulled my hand back. What was the point of these gifts now? The memory of last Christmas sliced through me. I had brought trays of food thinking it would help, and still, Emily wrinkled her nose saying my pies were too plain. The year before that, I bought the new oven my parents use every day, and Dad brushed it off as if it were nothing. I could feel the humiliation from those moments rise again in my throat. I looked down at the screen, still glowing in my hand. We all agreed. "You're not welcome." The words seemed to burn themselves into my skin. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead, I placed it face down on the table and pressed both hands against my knees to keep them from shaking. Outside, snow began to fall fine and steady, covering the streetlights with a faint haze. I watched it swirl, thinking of the long dining table in my parents' house, the china plates, the clinking glasses. I could already hear their laughter, see Emily in some bright dress raising a glass, Michael telling another joke, Mom fussing over the ham. My chair would not be there. Not empty, not even mentioned. Just gone as if I had never existed. The silence in the apartment pressed heavy against my chest. My reflection in the glass stared back at me. Pale eyes, rimmed red lips, tight with words I had never spoken aloud. "How could you?" My whisper cracked the stillness. I thought of every dollar I had given, every smile I had forced every time I swallowed the hurt. As the snow kept falling, one truth settled like ice in my stomach. If this was how they could erase me with a single sentence, then maybe it was time to face everything I had tried so hard to forget. And the memories were already coming back one after another, waiting for me to open the door. I remembered the hospital room in 2010, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air, my father lying pale against the sheets. The doctor spoke in numbers and costs, and my mother's hands trembled as she held the bills. Without hesitation, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote $12,000. I told myself it was family, that this was what a daughter did. No one looked at me with gratitude. They only sighed with relief and moved on as if the money had fallen from the sky. 5 years later, Emily announced she wanted to study fashion in New York. She stood in the kitchen, waving glossy brochures, eyes glowing with excitement. My parents clapped proud of her ambition while I quietly calculated the tuition. When the acceptance letter came, they panicked about the cost. I wrote another check, 20,000 this time. Emily hugged me briefly, then rushed to call her friends. At the family barbecue that summer, my parents toasted her brilliance, never once mentioning who had made it possible. In 2018, it was Michael's turn. He had maxed out his credit cards, chasing some scheme, smiling sheepishly when the collectors called. He came to me late one night asking for help. I wanted to say no. Instead, I slid a check for 8,000 across the table. He promised to pay me back, but weeks turned into months, then years. The subject never came up again. At Thanksgiving that year, my parents praised Michael for finally getting serious about his career. I sat there with the taste of turkey in my mouth and bitterness lodged in my throat. Over and over, I convinced myself that giving was the path to being seen. If I carried the load, if I rescued them, maybe then they would turn toward me with pride. But every gathering proved me wrong. When Emily arrived in a new dress, they gushed over her. When Michael mentioned a small raise, they cheered. When I shared news of a promotion at the firm where I worked, my father changed the subject to the football game. I can still see the Thanksgiving table where I slid a $20,000 check into my mother's hand to cover overdue bills. That night, the living room rang with compliments for Emily's decorations and Michael's jokes. My name was never spoken. I was invisible, a walking wallet pulled out when needed, tucked away once emptied. The weight of those years pressed against me now as I stared at the fading lights on my own tree. Each memory stacked upon the next building, a wall between me and them. I had thought money could buy belonging, that sacrifice could buy love. But all it bought me was silence. Snow was still falling outside, soft against the dark glass, when my phone buzzed with another message. It was from Emily this time, her words dripping with satisfaction. "Enjoy your quiet night. We will raise a glass for you." I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached. The humiliation burned as hot as any flame. I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my face, forcing myself to breathe. If they could erase me after everything I had done, then maybe the years of sacrifice had been nothing but fuel for their comfort. I could not stop thinking about how often David had warned me that one day they would push too far. He was right. And as I sat there in the glow of my small apartment, another memory surfaced, one that involved David himself, a moment when my family's disdain had cut deeper than I admitted. It was the kind of wound that never fully closed, and it was about to shape the choice I would soon make. I remembered the Christmas gathering the year before, the smell of roasted ham filling my parents' house, garlands draped across the banister, the chatter of cousins echoing through the rooms. David had been standing beside me in a plain gray sweater, his hand gently pressed against my back as he tried to make conversation with my uncle. My mother's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. "At least Emily will marry someone who knows how to carry himself." Her eyes slid over David, as if he were invisible, her lips curling into a polite smile that felt more like a sneer. David did not answer. He simply looked down at the glass in his hand, his jaw tight. I touched his arm, but the damage was done. That night, when we got back to our apartment in Portland, he set his keys on the counter and quietly asked if I had heard her. I said yes, and he only nodded, retreating into silence. It was a silence that told me he would never forget. Now, a year later, when I told him about the call from Mom and the message in the group chat, he listened without interrupting. I sat on the edge of the bed, my voice trembling as I repeated every word, the way Michael laughed in the chat, the way Emily sent a heart, as if she had won something. David stood at the window, his shoulders tense, then turned and walked to me. He knelt down, so we were eye to eye, and took my hands. "Rachel," he said softly, "you have given them everything, and they still treat you like this. How much longer will you let them decide your worth?" I shook my head, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. "They are my family." He held my gaze, his voice firm now. "Family does not erase you. Family does not humiliate the person you love." He let out a slow breath and then asked the question that broke something open inside me. "Do you want to sit here crying while they toast each other? Or do you want to raise a glass of champagne with me on a beach in the Maldives?" His words pulled me upright. I stared at him, unsure if he was serious. He smiled just enough for me to know he was. "Rachel," he whispered, "choose them or choose us." I could not speak for a long time. My chest rose and fell as if I had run a mile. The truth pressed heavy in me. For years I had chosen them, chosen to be the dependable one, the one who filled in every gap. But where had it left me? Alone in an apartment, erased with a single message. David squeezed my hand, waiting for my answer. I leaned against him, my face against his shoulder, and let the silence stretch. My mind replayed every sacrifice, every time I had paid for something they could not, every time I had swallowed my pride. And then I pictured the beach, the ocean stretching wide, the sound of waves, instead of my mother's sharp words. I lifted my head, met his eyes, and nodded once. His relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as he pulled me into his arms. "We will book it tomorrow," he said. I let out a shaky laugh, still not sure if I was ready, but knowing I had to be. The thought of my family sitting around that long dining table without me still stung, but the idea of sitting here alone hurt even more. As I lay down that night, David's arm around me, I realized the decision was not just about a trip. It was about choosing the life I wanted to live and the people I wanted beside me. And deep inside, I knew the next step would be harder than booking a flight. It would mean cutting the ties that had bound me for decades, ties I had been too afraid to break. The morning after our conversation, I woke with a strange mix of heaviness and clarity. The gray Portland sky pressed against the window, and for a brief moment, I hoped to see my mother's name flash on my phone, calling to take it all back. The phone stayed silent until late afternoon, when it finally buzzed. I snatched it up, my heart foolishly lifting, only to read a single line from her. "Do not embarrass the family." My hands trembled around the phone before I let out a bitter laugh. I opened my laptop, pulled up the accounts I had managed for years, and began typing. My fingers shook at first, but steadied with each sentence. "Effective immediately, I revoke authorization and cancel all auto payments linked to my name." I sent the emails to the bank, the credit card companies, even the utility accounts I had quietly covered when they fell behind. For the first time in my life, I was not the guarantor, not the rescuer. When the final confirmation email came through, I closed the laptop and exhaled as though I had been holding my breath for decades. That evening, David set his computer on the kitchen table and turned the screen toward me. On it glowed the booking confirmation. First-class seats from Portland to Malé, departing December 24th. 7 nights in a water villa, private deck, infinity pool, $12,000, paid in full. My eyes lingered on the words, then on him. His voice was quiet but firm. "This is not just a trip. It is our Christmas." I looked at the small suitcase leaning against the wall beside the artificial tree. A few dresses, a swimsuit, sandals. I had packed it without thinking, as if my body had decided before my mind caught up. The blinking lights of the tree reflected against the metal zipper. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of spending Christmas without fear of being judged or erased. I whispered, "This will be the first Christmas I choose myself." David smiled, slid his arm around my shoulders and kissed my temple. "Tomorrow we leave," he said. The words sounded unreal, like a dream spoken aloud. I nodded, though part of me still clung to the ache of what I was leaving behind. On the morning of our flight, I wheeled the suitcase to the door. The apartment smelled faintly of pine from the cheap candles I had bought at the grocery store. My phone buzzed again, one last message from Mom. "Do not shame us." I stared at it for a long moment, then powered the phone off and dropped it into my bag. At the airport, the lines moved quickly. Holiday travelers bustling with bags and children. David held our boarding passes in one hand and my fingers in the other. When we stepped into the first-class cabin, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Wide seats, soft lighting, the promise of distance between me and everything I had carried. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching as snow began to fall across the runway, and felt a strange calm settle over me. As the plane engines roared to life, I knew there would be consequences waiting in Portland, accounts that would no longer pay themselves dinners, that would not end in applause. I closed my eyes and leaned back, reminding myself that I had chosen this. When the flight attendant placed a glass of champagne in my hand, I lifted it carefully, my reflection shimmering against the bubbles. For the first time in my life, I was not apologizing. I was leaving. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered what Christmas dinner in my parents' house would look like without me, and how long it would take before the cracks began to show. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled high above the clouds, the quiet hum of the engines wrapping around us like a lullaby. David leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closed, but I could not stop thinking about the house in Denver. I pictured the long oak table dressed in red and gold, my mother fussing over the ham, my father pouring wine into glasses, Emily arriving late as always in some bold red dress designed to draw every glance her way. The air there would be filled with laughter, with toasts, with the kind of cheer that always seemed to exist only when I was invisible. I lifted the glass of champagne the attendant had placed before me, watched the bubbles climb and break against the rim. The taste was sharp and sweet, nothing like the cheap sparkling cider my parents used to serve. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of my legs stretched comfortably across the wide seat, the champagne glass balanced in my hand, the caption typed almost without thought. "Merry Christmas, from 30,000 feet." I pressed send, and the image flew into the family group chat, like a flare in the night. For a while, there was silence. I tucked the phone away, telling myself I did not care if they ignored it. Then the vibration came. Michael's message blinked across the screen. "Where is Rachel?" My breath caught. He knew very well where I was. Mom answered first, brushing the question aside with a simple, "She is doing her own thing." Emily chimed in minutes later, her words cutting through the still air. "She never knew how to carry herself anyway." I stared at the line, felt the familiar sting, then closed the chat and leaned back into my seat. David opened his eyes, sensing my shift in mood. "What did they say?" I shook my head and forced a small smile. "Nothing that matters." He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "Let it go, Rachel. They have already shown you who they are." I wanted to believe him. I wanted the picture I sent to speak louder than anything they could write. Outside the window, the night sky stretched endless and dark, dotted with stars. Somewhere far below, families were sitting down to dinner, and I was gliding past them all, leaving behind the table that had never welcomed me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a cousin, a simple message with a wink. "Nice seat. Enjoy it." A rush of warmth spread through me. Not everyone was blind. Someone had noticed. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engines fill the silence. For the first time in years, I felt free, untethered from the endless cycle of giving and being erased. Yet even in that freedom, a thought curled inside me, a quiet anticipation of what would happen next. The photo had landed, the silence had cracked, and I knew the ripple would reach farther than a simple message on a phone screen. The plane touched down just as the sun was rising, casting gold across the turquoise water that stretched endlessly beyond the runway. When we stepped off the small transfer boat and onto the wooden dock, the heat wrapped around me warm and heavy, carrying the scent of salt and flowers. The villa waited at the end of a long path above the sea, its glass doors open to a wide deck where the waves lapped below. I stood there, stunned, listening to the hush of the ocean and the call of seabirds, as if the whole island had been waiting for us. Inside, the space glowed with polished wood and white linens. A private pool spilled into the horizon, and a ladder led straight into the water. I touched the railing with my hand and whispered without meaning to, "I never thought I would see a place like this." David slipped his arm around my waist and kissed my hair. "You deserve more than this, Rachel." His words carried no pity, only certainty, and I believed him for the first time. That night he led me down to the beach, where a table for two was set on the sand lit by lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. The ocean shimmered in the moonlight. He poured wine into my glass, and then took my hand across the table. His voice was low, almost lost to the sound of the waves. "I chose us a long time ago. Now it is your turn to choose yourself. I stared at the flickering flame between us, remembering nights in Denver, when my name was left unspoken, when my sacrifices were swallowed by silence. I thought of birthdays, spent alone, promotions, ignored the check I had written, while everyone praised Emily's decorations. All the wounds I had buried rose up with the sound of the surf. For a moment I could not breathe. Then I lifted my eyes to his and felt something break open. The weight I had carried for decades slipped from my shoulders. I nodded slowly, tears catching in the corners of my eyes. For once, I was not agreeing to give or to yield. I was agreeing to myself. David squeezed my hand and smiled, and the world around me shifted. The villa, the sea, the stars above us, all of it seemed to whisper the same truth. I was not invisible here. Later we walked barefoot along the water, our footprints trailing behind, until the tide erased them. The sand was cool beneath my feet. David stopped, pulled me close, and rested his forehead against mine. "This is the life we get to build," he said. "Not the one they forced on you." I closed my eyes and let the words sink into me. The sound of laughter from my family's house in Denver felt like a memory from another life. Here there was only the ocean, the man beside me, and the realization that I no longer had to beg for a place at any table. I had my own. Still as I lay awake in the villa later that night, the sound of waves against the stilts below, I knew the story with my family was not finished. I had chosen freedom, but back in Denver, the consequences of my choice were already unfolding, and soon their world would begin to crack. In Denver, the dining room at my parents' house glittered with candles and polished silverware, but beneath the shine tension was rising. Plates of food had been served, glasses filled, and laughter drifted across the table until the manager from the catering company stepped quietly inside. His voice was polite but firm as he leaned toward my father. "Sir, your card has been declined." The room fell silent. My father's face flushed a deep red as he fumbled for his wallet. "Try this one," he muttered, sliding another card across. Moments later, the manager shook his head again. "Declined." My mother bristled, her voice sharp enough for every guest to hear. "That cannot be right. Run it again." The manager nodded, tried once more, and gave the same answer. "I am sorry, but we will need $5,000 before the evening is over." Chairs scraped as people shifted uncomfortably. Emily slammed her fork down her cheeks, blotched with anger. "This is ridiculous. Why would this happen tonight?" Her eyes cut toward my father, then toward my mother as if demanding answers. Michael tried to intervene, standing to speak with the manager, offering promises and reassurances, but none of it mattered without payment. Whispers spread along the table. Relatives exchanged glances, their voices low but sharp. One uncle shook his head. "You cannot treat your daughter like she does not matter and expect luck to stay on your side." Another cousin pushed back her chair, muttering that she would not sit through this embarrassment. A pair of family friends gathered their coats and slipped out into the cold night, murmuring that something was clearly wrong in this house. Emily rose to her feet, her voice raised. "We cannot let her think she has won. She always wanted to make us look bad." My mother snapped back. "Enough." "Emily, sit down." But the damage was done. The guests had seen the cracks. My father stood frozen, unable to find words, his pride crumbling under the weight of the stares around him. Then came the final blow. A relative at the far end of the table unlocked his phone, turned the screen toward the group and said quietly, "Look at this." On the screen was the photo I had taken on the plane. My legs stretched across the seat, a glass of champagne in hand. The caption was clear: "Merry Christmas from 30,000 feet." The chatter stopped instantly. Forks hung in midair. All eyes turned to my mother, whose face drained of color. For the first time, she understood what it meant that I had turned off the auto payments closed. The accounts stepped away from the role they had forced on me. I was no longer their safety net. Michael dropped back into his seat. His expression conflicted, caught between shame and a quiet recognition. Emily crossed her arms, fuming but silent. My father lowered his gaze, the weight of humiliation pressing on his shoulders. My mother sat motionless, her lips parted, but no sound coming out. Far away in the Maldives, I could not hear the silence that filled that room, but I felt it. In the still night air outside my villa, with the waves breaking softly below, something inside me whispered that their world had shifted. And as I stood on the deck staring out into the darkness, I knew the final choice was waiting for me, a choice that would decide how I lived the rest of my life. The fireworks began just after midnight, streaks of red and gold bursting above the ocean, their reflections scattering across the black water. I sat on the balcony of the villa, my bare feet resting on the warm wood, the night air thick with salt and smoke. Behind me, David wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me close. His breath brushed against my ear as he whispered that I had a family of my own now. The words settled deep in me. For so many years, I had chased a seat at a table where I was never welcome, where my name was swallowed by silence. Now, under the glow of distant fire, I felt no hunger for that seat. I leaned back against David and let the ache drain away. The anger that had once burned in me was gone. What remained was something steadier, a quiet certainty that I no longer needed them to tell me who I was. I thought of my mother's face when that photo of me reached the table in Denver, her shock as she realized I had stepped away from being their safety net. I imagined my father fumbling with his wallet, Michael shrinking into his chair, Emily's pride collapsing into fury. They would have to sit with the truth that the daughter they dismissed was the one who kept them afloat. I did not need to see it to know. David pressed a kiss to my shoulder and asked if I was happy. I turned my head and looked at him, his face lit by the flare of the fireworks, and I answered without hesitation. Yes, I am. For the first time, I was not pretending. The waves crashed against the stilts of the villa, carrying the sound into the night. I let my mind wander through the years, the hospital bills, the tuition checks, the unpaid debts. Each memory passed like a wave rolling back into the sea, leaving only foam behind. I had been invisible for so long, but here in this place, in this life, I was seen. I lifted my glass, the last of the champagne, catching the sparkle of the fireworks, and whispered to myself that revenge was not about destroying them. It was about no longer letting them decide my worth. That was the victory. That was the justice. David held me tighter, and I felt the future stretch out before us, not as a battle to be fought, but as a life to be lived. The villa around us was quiet, the island sleeping, yet I felt awake in a way I never had before. Far away, my family was left with the choices they had made, choices that carved me out of their circle until I built one of my own. And as the last firework faded into smoke, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most powerful revenge is to live beautifully, leaving those who rejected you to face the silence they created. If you have ever been dismissed or overlooked by the very people who should have valued you, remember this. You have the right to choose joy, to choose peace, to choose your own family. Tell me, have you ever had to stand up for your worth against your own family? And what choice did you make?